Hi everyone. I feel like a total liar because I really was going to try to keep these presentations short. Some materials a little more difficult though, right? So here we are. Part 3 of week 4 lecture material, and we're talking about the causative agent of malaria, and it is in the genus Plasmodium. So, statistically speaking, malaria is one of the most threatening diseases to humans and affects 40% of the world's population every year. And yet we don't hear about it here. This is why it's super important that that our country, being one that has access to medications, can help those countries that are constantly fighting this disease. So we see there's over 200 species of Plasmodium species, and there's an asexual stage or phase and a sexual phase. So let's take a look at this very colorful diagram from your textbook. And essentially, we know mosquitoes are going to be the host of Plasmodium. So in the mosquito, that is where the sexual phase is being carried out. And so when you get bit by a mosquito, then you're essentially getting injected with what they call the sporozoite. That sporozoite is essentially going to colonize your liver cells and reproduce itself in another form called the merozoite. And the merozoite then can infect the red blood cells. So this is where it gets really serious, because we have what we call the lysing of the red blood cells. So they're bursting. And as they're releasing the contents inside of those red blood cells, along with themselves, they are releasing a variety of toxins that are essentially then starting the first symptoms. But the symptoms tend to be cyclic because of the reproductive intervals of the trophozoites. So the trophozoites then are essentially doing their thing, and we see that there's the other phase, the gametocytes that are made, and then when a mosquito bites the human, now they're infected with that if they weren't already infected. So signs and symptoms, there is an incubation period. At first, you're going to feel really tired, really awful. Maybe you're coming down with, the flu, chills, fever, sweating. And as I mentioned, there's this 48 to 72 hour interval where the symptoms correlate with that massive reproduction of the merozoites. It's important to get diagnosed quickly. If you know that you're actually visiting a country that is known to have malaria, then you should be taking anti-malarials with you, and you take those 7 days before you start your trip. Take it for the duration of your trip and a whole week when you come home. Anti-malarials are not things that we just take willy-nilly. If you're a pregnant woman, you have to be careful about some medications, and some of the anti-malarials are those medications that we should be concerned about. So complications, hemolytic anemia because of the decrease in red blood cells, because they're being lysed, because they're functioning as the host cell for that Plasmodium. You can also get organ enlargement and rupture due to essentially cellular debris that's starting to build up in your organs like your spleen, your liver, and your kidneys. So there can be a severe complication of malaria we call cerebral malaria. And what happens is the tiny little blood vessels in the brain are going to get obstructed or clogged with these lysed red blood cells, and then you get decreased oxygen to the brain. So very serious condition. Some people actually have relapses because the infected liver cells still harbor dormant parts of the life cycle for up to 5 years. So here's the malaria belt. You're usually thinking tropical environments, warm, not really distinct cold seasons like we have here, and of course puddles of water. Mosquitoes can lay their eggs and reproduce rapidly. Another protozoan, this one is an STI, Trichomonas vaginalis, I believe I mentioned earlier. It does not have the cis form and does not survive long outside the host, but it definitely is spread through intimate contact. A lot of people will not have any symptoms at all. Females will often can have a type of discharge. So typically when you're thinking discharges from either the male or the female in the genital area, that's not really a good thing. So go get it checked out. But essentially it can cause discharge from the infection. Okay. Next one, Toxoplasma gondii, and I should have italicized gondii. Essentially, if you've ever been pregnant or you know someone who's been pregnant and they were concerned about having cats in the house, this is where this idea comes from. So Toxoplasma is a protozoan infection that can come from essentially handling the feces of cats, because one of the reproductive parts of the life cycle, called the oocyst, is released in the feces of the cat. So if you're going in and scooping out the litter box, particularly these drying litters, and it's really drying out the feces, then those oocytes become airborne and you can inhale it. What's not often talked about is that you can also get toxoplasma from raw or undercooked meat. So that's, of course, a concern if you're pregnant. If you get toxoplasma yourself, oftentimes you can be exposed, your immune system launches, and you have some long-term immunity. But the concern really is in immunocompromised individuals, and pregnant women are immunocompromised to some extent, as well as the ability to pass on that protozoan to your offspring, which can lead to a devastating effects. So the tachyzoites, I want to show you a figure in just a minute. These can cross the placenta and get into the fetus, and this is where we're going to have some serious conditions. So hygiene is important. Wash your hands after handling cat feces. Have somebody else handle the litter box stuff. If you're in a house with a cat, you're not going to get toxoplasma. I mean, that's just, it's the handling the feces, and if they're infected, and a lot of cats are infected, it's just, you take proper, hygiene measures. Okay, so if you do have symptoms, they're generally mild. You might not even know that you have toxoplasma. You might just think it's a cold or something else. Moving down, pregnant females have a 33% chance of transmitting the infection to the fetus. And if your fetus contracts that in the first or second trimester, not so good. Stillbirth, liver and spleen enlargement, liver failure, hydrocephalus, or the enlarging of the head, convulsions, and can result in blindness of your fetus. Now, here's an interesting tidbit, is that we're not normally testing people for toxoplasma, okay? But essentially, they have looked at research of individuals that have thrill-seeking behaviors and slower reaction times, and it appears that there's a correlation with repeated or with the history of toxoplasma infections. So it's kind of interesting to see underlying reasons for, some behavioral type changes or behavioral health changes. Now, some of these infections can go overlooked for long periods of time and result in what we call subacute encephalitis. So it just goes undetected until now it's like a bigger issue, but it's just a subacute infection of the, subacute encephalitis. So here is the life cycle. Kind of interesting. I'm going to let you study it if you want to, but essentially what you have is a very complex life cycle with some intermediate hosts, with a lot of activity with the oocyst, and then this tachyzoite. So the tachyzoite being active in the blood or actively transferred to the fetus is a big concern. And you see the sources there. I like this picture. Okay, lastly, parasitic worms. Okay, so helminths is the common term just for worms. And we have two major groups of worms we're going to talk about. And these worms do better in tropical environments. Again, little seasonal effect to kill bat populations, as well as warm temperatures and high humidity. So big thing. So conservative estimate of 50 million helminth infections in North America alone. So you may ask yourself, oh my Lord, where is that coming from? A big one is pinworm in children. So very common childhood infection of what we call roundworms or nematodes. Down below, you can see I highlighted Taenia. Taenia is the tapeworm. So tapeworms also, we can harbor tapeworms, but oftentimes our pets and our farm animals and animals we eat harbor tapeworms. So let's take a look. Helminths are the flatworms and the roundworms. So just as their name implies, one group is flattened And the big group that we're thinking about there are tapeworms, and the other group are flukes, although I'm not going to make you responsible for the fluke thing, but do remember Taenia is tapeworms. All right. Then we have roundworms. Roundworms literally are round. When you look at them, they don't have true body cavities, so they're a little bit odd that way. But essentially, yeah. And both of them are making tons and tons of eggs. And they like to live in reproductive tracts of their hosts and rob their nutrients and just reproduce over and over and over again. So let's look at Taenia. So this is a tapeworm. They're also showing you a fluke down here in figure B. But anyway, take a look at figure A. So the cool thing about Taenia is that essentially it has these repeating segments. They're not really true segments, but these repeating compartments, if you will. And each compartment is essentially every major organ that it needs. These things don't have organ systems. So each of those little compartments has to do everything it needs to survive on its own-ish. So one characteristic of tapeworms is they have to have some way to anchor into their host. So once they've acquired entry, they are going to attach inside the intestines. So the very first compartment or segment has not only suckers, but it also has hooks. And so it literally anchors into the intestinal wall. So then it's just going to be absorbing the byproducts of digestion from its host and then making these repeated segments. Now, each segment has male and female reproductive structures, so they can essentially be dividing sexually or making eggs, and what then happens is not only are the eggs eliminated through the feces, but also these compartments or segments are also released through the feces. So it can easily be picked up in nature. So if you have a cat that has tapeworm and it's defecating outside, then, animals like to eat other animal feces, so that we can move between the specific hosts that are involved in its life cycle. So how do you get it? Well, undercooked pork is the big one. Certainly, again, if you have poor hygiene, maybe you're, mishandling your litter boxes and so on. If, you happen to be, like if I was a young child, I'm outside, I'm eating grass and there happen to be seeds on it, then there are ways to get tapeworms. But usually we're thinking mostly our cats and dogs get tapeworms. That's why we deworm them. And then also from undercooked pork. So the other two that I'd like for you to know is Ascaris and Terabias, and they're both roundworms. So we see a figure of that worm on the right, what it kind of looks like. It kind of looks like thick spaghetti. So we see that, and then you can see the inside of its body. So again, these things have all the things that they need to do to reproduce. They are passed from many hosts through adulthood, and then they mate in their final, what they call the definitive host, and begin to reproduce those eggs. So the big infection is Enterobius, which is pinworms. So we often have this as a problem in daycares because children get pinworms from essentially from each other, right? So again, poor hygiene, and what it does is it creates like an itchy anus, and so kids are sticking their hands down their pants and itching, and then spreading the eggs here, there, and everywhere, and then other kids can pick it up from not washing their hands before eating, or again, poor hygiene. I did want to go back to the table real quick. Ascaris was one that I mentioned, just combined it with pinworm. It is a roundworm. And so it is often associated with fecal pollution of soil. So in areas that are prone to Ascaris, it's super important to be like washing anything that's coming from the soil, like before you're eating it or whatever. I think there's a little bit more to that, but it's escaping my mind at the moment. So anyway, reach out if you have questions. Hope you love microscopic eukaryotes as much as I do. They're awesome. They all have their place in the world. I'll see you next week.